Hey AP Bio, it's me, Mrs. Willis, and I'm here to talk to you about the history of life and where scientists think that the origins of life started and what some of the evidence that shows those origins as well as for the continuation of evolution. So let's get started. One of the ideas that was created to create the idea of where maybe life came from on Earth is called the organic soup hypothesis. And so early Earth was created about 4.6 billion years ago, and there were a lot of inorganic molecules that existed at that time. From those, scientists think that they changed shape, they combined with other things to make organic molecules, which became the basis for living objects. Now, thanks to the work of Oparin and Haldane in 1920, we started getting this idea that smaller things made up bigger things in the living world. So we know that these smaller things are called monomers. You put them to get polymers, and we apply this in biology to the making of macromolecules, right? So if you put a whole bunch of amino acids together, which are monomers, you can get proteins, which are the polymers or the polypeptides. And so this knowledge and idea was applied to early Earth. Well, if you put all these basic precursors together, maybe they can make these bigger molecules that can support life. So if I were to ask you, how do you make a cell? What would you come up with, or what would you think of? And so scientists started asking this question: what would basic cells look like? And they said, okay, well, something has to happen where smaller molecules come together and they polymerize. So they make these bigger macromolecules that we're used to, like carbs and lipids and so forth. And then you'd have to package them in a nice little membrane type structure. And so what they came up with was this idea of a protobiont. So let me show you a picture of that. So this is what is thought to be the first very basic cells. So you had your polymers placed inside some sort of membrane structure, and there you go. And that living unit could become the bigger life forms that we see today. Urey and Miller conducted a very famous experiment where they tried to show this idea of taking these smaller precursors and putting them together to make these larger molecules. So they set up the apparatus that you see here in the screen, and in the glass tubing they put things that were found in early life. So things like water and methane and hydrogen gas and carbon monoxide. And then, of course, they subjected those molecules to conditions that were expected on early Earth. So they gave them electrical shocks, and they applied cold water and condensed things and so forth, applied pressure to see what they could come up with. And what they found out is that, yes, you could possibly create these bigger molecules with just the primitive gases that were found in early Earth. So another hypothesis that came along to kind of explain the idea of genetic information and how it codes for things is called the RNA world hypothesis. And in this hypothesis, scientists state that RNA was in fact the first genetic material before DNA. And this also comes from these smaller precursors, right? So we were able to put these smaller molecules together to make a bigger structure like a nucleic acid. So from that, you could make RNA. Well, as you know, RNA is single-stranded, and it can actually self-replicate, right? We know there's different kinds like messenger and ribosomal and transfer. And so the idea is that that RNA then paved the way for DNA and DNA creation. What's great about RNA is it's a nucleic acid, right? It's a genetic code. So it does store genetic information just like DNA. And it can also catalyze chemical reactions and definitely act like a protein. In fact, there are these enzyme proteins called ribozymes that work in a similar fashion. So they can definitely speed up reactions when needed. So these two pieces of evidence definitely led to this idea that maybe RNA was the first genetic information in these early life forms. A lot of the evidence that's being collected to kind of show the origin of life and what's happening is being collected through geology. So scientists are finding older rock samples, they're finding older life forms, they're dating them to pretty much support this idea that life originated about 2.5 billion years ago, and it's definitely changed over the course of the years. So when we talk about early Earth, you should probably just remember these dates. Earth formed about 4.6 billion years ago. That's what scientists believe. And then they felt that it was really too hostile, meaning it was too hot. The conditions were just not right for life until about 3.9 billion years ago. So that's when you start seeing these ideas of, okay, how did life originate? What you're looking at here is what is called cyanobacteria. Now, this is fossilized bacteria that you're looking at, and it is aged to be about 3.5 billion years ago. What makes this bacteria so special is that it has the ability to photosynthesize. So it contains the mechanism to actually take sunlight and convert it into glucose. So this piece of evidence definitely is supporting that there were some early life forms here on Earth, and they were very, very basic in structure, but becoming more complex along the way. And the last thing I want you to stop and kind of just think about is that every living form that we have had here on Earth and in the past has contained some sort of genetic evidence, some sort of molecular evidence in the form of a nucleic acid. And what's really interesting is whether you talk about bacteria or a zebra or human, we all contain the same basic instructions. So we all have genetic information, a nucleic acid, and they have those nitrogen bases, A, T, C, or G, or if we're talking about RNA, it contains uracil, right? So what does this show? Well, it definitely shows that there was and there is still some sort of common ancestry. So early life forms, they were very simple. We're talking about just those small molecules coming together to make the bigger molecules, encasing them in a membrane from our basic cell structure to what we see today. All right, so that kind of concludes our talk on the origins of life, and I'll see you guys soon.